to start with, what we're dealing with is this Upstate Art Weekend, which is something like 61 or 63 locations in upstate New York, from, you know, Beacon up to Hudson, basically, and a little beyond that. Many of these locations are small venues. I am going to focus on basically about 4 or 5 locations, but I'll mention some of the others too. So what I'm going to do is try to cover a lot of ground in 45 minutes or so. So what I'm going to do is spend probably the first half hour focusing on the Hudson River School, because that's where part of the exhibition's taking place, which is at Thomas Cole's home, which was on the left-hand screen lower is the old house, and on the top is his old studio, and on the right-hand side of the screen is Olana, or Frederick Church's estate in Hudson. So basically, Thomas Cole was in Catterskill, which is right across the river, and Olana was just above Hudson. And if you've ever been there, you'll know the views are spectacular. He chose this well, and it's really a grand location. So let's see. What I'm going to start with is there is an exhibition that's taking place at Olana and the Thomas Cole homestead, which is called cross-pollination. So it's a combination of Frederick Church's work, Thomas Cole's work, and let's see, I think there's a couple of pieces by Asher B. Durand, but I'm not 100% certain about that. But what actually is also there is a set of contemporary art pieces, which are mixed in with the permanent exhibition. So here we go. Thomas Cole was basically 1801 to 1848. An Anglo-American painter known for his landscape and history paintings. One of the major 19th century American painters. He's regarded as the founder of the Hudson River School, an American art movement that flourished in the mid-19th century. Cole's work is known for its romantic portrayal of the American wilderness. In 1836 article on American scenery, he describes his complex relationship with the American landscape as aesthetic, emotional, and spiritual terms. Asher B. Durand was a fellow founder, and basically this was a very American movement. Durand depicted imagery, imaginary sites, but used great naturalistic style and detail. He was a master of light and color. All hallmarks of his work, and that his mentor, Thomas Cole, who's passing Durand's painting, eulogizes. So down below, you see the Catskill Valley by Asher B. Durand, and you see Catskill Creek by Thomas Cole, and you can see the compositions are very similar. You know, Duran did this in homage to Cole. So this is a very late painting for Cole since he died the year after. Let's see. Okay. Thomas Cole's view of Mount Holyoke, Northampton, Massachusetts, after a thunderstorm, the Oxbow. So this is really kind of a classic piece of Hudson River painting. Great detail, great sense of grandeur of you know, there's all these elements put together, the sun, the storm, the dramatic foreground, and great detail. And if you, let's see, if I'm gonna get a zoom in here, okay. And basically, if you look right here in the foreground, you see the artist in the scene, out there painting with his umbrella still over there. And you can see how detailed the painting is. I mean, basically these little trees down there in the Oxbow, and the detail of the foliage is quite remarkable. Not the greatest reproduction for you to be able to see it, but you get the idea. Really, what Cole was focused on was he was really an early ecologist. I mean, he looked at what was happening in America and seeing how these great forests were being leveled up and down the Hudson Valley. You know, basically, you know, all the old growth forests were cut down for farmland and used for firewood and for building and all that. So he was watching the change taking place in this wonderful grandeur of nature, and watching it being basically decimated. And so one of his concerns was with that. Notice that this was dated in 1836. This is the same year that Ralph Waldo Emerson published his essay on nature. And so that kind of sense of transcendentalist attachment to nature, the kind of rhythms of nature as a manifestation of a higher rhythm, a higher force, and basically a lot of the Hudson River painters were involved in that sort of spiritual notion that our connection to the earth was important to our spiritual lives. Okay. After 1827, Cole maintained a studio at a farm called Cedar Grove in the town of Catterskill, New York. He painted a significant portion of his work in this studio and took on only one significant student, and that was Frederick Church. In 1836, he married Maria Bartow of Catskill, a niece of the owner of the farm, and became a year-round resident. Thomas Cole and Maria had 5 children. Cole's daughter, Emily, was a botanical artist, as was Church's daughter, Isabel, known as Downey, but you'll see more images from her. So I'm showing you images of Catterskill Falls, and Catterskill Falls was a major attraction For artists, basically, they flocked up here when they saw these images. Now, Cole was fairly successful. There were very few galleries in the early 1800s in New York. He put together a show in New York City in a very well-known bookstore, and sold a number of paintings, I think 5 to 7 paintings out of that first show that he did. So he was getting a good deal of success. Now, before this period of time, most of the art that sold in the United States was portraiture. Basically, there were plenty of itinerant portrait painters that went out and painted portraits, but there was very little landscape that was being done. Cole was really an innovator of this kind of work, and his kind of hyperrealism, the kind of reverence for nature, really struck a chord for in the American psyche. Okay, and now I'm showing you his disciple. By 1848, Church had passed, but excuse me, Cole had passed, but Church took up the mantle of the Hudson River painters, and you can see the difference in quality, the color, and different kinds of detail. Asher B. Duran on the left, and these two wonderful, colorful pieces by Cole. Now, one of the other things is, this Catterskill Falls thing. Basically, there was an inn that was nearby, and it just, like, people just flooded. Tourists and painters came up from New York to go out and paint in the wilderness. With the innovation of the train line and all that, it made it a lot easier to get up the Hudson. Now, I wanted to touch on this kind of surrealist fantasy level in Cole's work, and how Church carried it forward in a very different way. This kind of surrealistic image of Cole's kind of well, let me do a zoom in so that you can see some of the details. Like up here, you see all these little sailboats floating around inside here, and there's little buildings on the edges of this. Okay, and now you scroll down, and there's sailboats down here in this supposed lake. It's kind of, an amalgam of all these different traditional classical elements. Now, Cole was European. He was born in England and came to the United States. So he had, this background in kind of the old masters technique that he saw. He was trained as an engraver and etcher, so he was familiar with art before he came to the United States. And when you look at Nature and Civilization, Sunrise in Syria, Church traveled to these sites. He went to the Middle East. He went to South America. He traveled to you know, different areas, and his work is really a mixture of science, botany, archaeology, and history, with a good dose of romantic mysticism mixed in. So he would go to these sites. He would go to the Parthenon and paint it. He would go to, well, you'll see. I'm going to go further into some of his travels. But he was also a Yankee Doodle dandy. This piece was the beginning of the Civil War, and Church created this painting, which actually was translated into a patriotic poster that circulated around the Union at the time. So interesting guy, an interesting image. Okay, and now again, not many people were going to the Arctic. Not many people were traveling like this to actually sketch and see these things, these phenomena in nature. So Church was a very adventurous fellow, and he brought all this back to New York. Let's see. Okay. Rainy season in the tropics. So this would be, you know, basically down in the Andes. He would do these paintings. He'd go down and do these trips and do sketching and oil sketches and a lot of drawing. And then he would come back to the studio in New York and create these large scale. I mean, this is 56 by 84 inches. This is a large scale piece. And what Church would do is he would create an atmosphere in the studio, basically in his display space in New York City. He would take you know, weavings and tapestries from the local Peruvian indigenous people, and he would have panpipes playing in the background, and he would have food that was native to the area. And so they would play music, and it would be a whole installation art piece that people would come in to see. And people would pay, they would line up around the block to pay a quarter, and that was a lot of money back then, to go in and actually experience this large scale painting in this atmosphere. So it's a very interesting guy, very business savvy, shall we say. And by this time, actually, I think it was 1870 something, that the Metropolitan Museum came into existence. And Church was one of the founding members of the board of trustees for the Metropolitan Museum. So he was very active. He was involved in the National Academy, which was one of the only places to display art in New York City before the Metropolitan came into being. Okay, and this is Albert Bierstadt. Now, Albert Bierstadt was a competitor, a compatriot, and did very similar large scale. I mean, this is a gigantic painting. This Sierra Nevada piece is 72 by 120 inches, so it's 6 by 10 feet wide. and he would do the same thing that Church would do. He would set up a display in the studio space, and people would pay to come and see the painting. And you know, Bierstadt was a German-born artist, unlike Church, but he had a great reverence for the American wilderness. And in actuality, Bierstadt, I don't know about Church, but I know Bierstadt brought his paintings back to Europe, and those toured and got great notice in the European art world, given the fascination with the grandiose natural settings of America. People were fascinated by all of this stuff. Okay. And this shows a group of paintings that kind of show the mid 18th century to the end of the 18th century and the evolution of a certain kind of painting, the appreciation for the paint itself and using it as part of the expressive quality of the painting. So basically, Kinset, Church below. This is an oil sketch on paper, and in many ways, I love his oil sketches more than his more fully developed paintings because it's so loose and painterly. And on the right, upper right hand, is a very late, wonderful painting by George Isabel. And all of these are kind of in that same area near Catterskill Falls. The Kensit is above Catterskill Falls, and the George Isabel is a woodland pool, quote unquote. Now, I don't know how much of that would have been painted plein air, but I know that the Church paintings on paper are definitely plein air. He painted on the spot, you know, so you can see that kind of rapid paint quality, leaving the brush marks, allowing it to just be there so he can capture the moment very quickly. You know, this is a sunset, so that happens pretty quick. Okay. And this basically, these are two Kensit pieces. Study of Beaches, it's a small painting, would have been done, you know, plein air, on the spot, very fresh. The paint quality, you can see the brushwork and the brush quality. Kensit was one of the first to take to the coast from Connecticut through New England. A large number of paintings were found in his studio at his death at 56 from pneumonia. Kensit, Church, Heed, and Bierstadt from the 1850s to the 1870s could be considered part of an offshoot of the Hudson River School, the Luminist movement. It was succeeded by what was called the tonalist movement, and that was kind of, that George Isabel painting that we saw before is actually typical of that style. So the Hudson River School, as you can see, is very diverse. It wasn't just focused on painting the Hudson River itself. It encompassed South America. It went out west. It was these fantasy paintings. It was a very diverse group, but it was really kind of, they encapsulated it into the Hudson River School as the first American school of painting. Okay, so there are various, you know, that's over an 80-year period of time. So there was a great deal of diversity in the artwork that was done by a lot of different artists. Okay. So here we go from Niagara Falls, done by Thomas Cole in 1830. You get the sense of detail. You get, you know, there's these two little Native Americans in there looking out at the falls. Up above is one of Church's many. He did probably a dozen large-scale finished paintings of Niagara Falls that I know of. I know he did a lot more than that as far as sketches are concerned, but this is one of his finished, more polished pieces. And then below, you get the atmospheric quality of this George Inness Niagara. You know, basically, it's more about mist than it is about detail. It's more about mood than it is about specificity. Very abstract in certain ways. Okay, and now we're back to Olana. In fact, let's see, Olana was built it was finished in 1872. Church bought a cottage on the property in Hudson near this location, and kind of waited until this piece of property up on the top of the hill. Now, if you look down in this lower sketch, let's see if I can get the zoom up. Right here, you can see Olana painted up on the top of that hill in this oil sketch by Church. But that piece, this aspect was not built, finished until 1872. Okay, so this view you can see out through the window, out over the veranda of the Hudson River. You can see the same view in the upper right that Church painted in 1867. Okay, and of course, Frederick Church's wife wanted a garden, but Church wanted to keep the natural views as much as possible out his windows. So they created the garden down over the edge of a retaining wall out on the edge of the property, overlooking the Hudson. So you could not see this beautiful little garden from the house. You had to go out to see it. It's a lovely garden, and they've really done a great job at reproducing this. In fact, Olana was going to pretty much ruin or needed a lot of work, shall we say. In 1960, I believe it was 66, when the property was going up for sale, there was a consortium of people that got together and they bought the property along with the state and created this state landmark park. Thank goodness. I mean, basically this would have been demolished and become beautiful houses up on that hill, but we have this as a national landmark, and it's part of the state park system. Okay. In this show, Cross Pollination, Martin Johnson Head did this whole series in 1863-64 of hummingbirds of Brazil. And there are spectacular examples of these paintings in Olana and at the new studio over at Cole's homestead across the river in Catskill. So it's about a 10-minute drive from Olana to Cole's homestead, and well worth the trip. Both of these places, Olana and Frederick Cole, Thomas Cole's home, are open for tours. You need to set up an appointment to go, but it's well worth it. They're really interesting. You know, Olana is quite the place. I have some more pictures of it a little later on that I'll show you. It's very, you know, high Victorian, ornate, over the top. Where Thomas Cole's place is a lot more humble, but actually a lot brighter, and really, you know, worth the trip for both these places. Okay, I'm just gonna flip through these fairly quickly at this point because we've got a lot to get to. But these are beautiful little pieces, really exquisite, and these are all by Martin Johnson Head. And here is one of his landscapes, and you can see where the name Luminist came from. These beautiful, buoyant landscapes. Okay, and now we're moving on to Isabel Downey Church, Goldenrod. This is a watercolor by her, and she was quite the botanical painter. They're very beautiful pieces. And then Emily Cole, I believe it was around the same time, although there wasn't a date on this watercolor of the Lady Slipper. They knew one another, of course. Okay, and there's this banner project that they're doing. This is part of the contemporary art piece. They're hung in the trees throughout the landscape. You come upon them in the woods when you're off in the trails. Olana is, I believe, 250 acres of property, much larger than the Cole estate. There's a pond down below. There's actually the cottage that they first bought when they moved to Hudson. That is office space, so I don't think you can go and look at it, but it's not really accessible. Just the mansion is accessible. Okay, and here's a good shot of Olana, and you can see how crazy and ornate the place is. You know, there's all this tile work and different kinds of stonework on it. Really, you know, he was involved in it. They had a great architect involved, and I can't remember his name now. I'm sorry, but I have a link to a fully detailed tour of Olana that's on YouTube that you can all watch, and you'll get more detail than I am going into at this stage of the game about the interior, and you're going to be able to see it even better than you can when you go there in person, because basically it's so dark inside this place. The windows are really small. You know, it was a Victorian place. Now, in fact, Church used to paint out of doors a lot. when he was up here. He did have a studio inside, but he had a big studio in New York City, and that's where a lot of his work was done. Now, you can see another one of the bird banners down below, and this piece, Fallen, is an interesting piece. This is a contemporary artwork. Basically, this hemlock tree was on the property, and it died and fell. And the artist had an idea that related to the history of the hemlock in the Hudson Valley. In fact, there were an abundance of hemlock trees throughout the entire Hudson Valley, and they were felled because there was tannin in the bark of the hemlock tree. It was used to cure and tan hides. So basically, what you see here is this artist, let me see if I can zoom in, took leather and nailed it, tacked it to the outside of the bark, outside the bark of this entire tree. And you can see the bark beneath the tree. And she basically was kind of giving us a cue as to what happened to the rest of the hemlocks throughout the Hudson Valley. The concern for nature and for the kind of existential threat we look at now was something that was present in the Hudson River School, and they saw it early on. They saw nature being altered radically, and we see the results at this point. Okay, and these are some contemporary pieces which are inside the Olana by contemporary artists. So this is they're fun because you find these amongst the tchotchkes that are strewn throughout the interior of the mansion, along with Church's pieces. And this piece on the right is a small painting executed by Richard Estes, a fairly well-known photorealist. And the piece on the left is from a videotape which is being played in an area of the exhibition. Okay, and now we're going to move on. Stoneleaf is a residence, and it's across the river. It's actually near Woodstock, which there are a number of locations around that area. So when you get the map, you'll be able to find where Stoneleaf is and where Bird Cliff and the Woodstock Art Association. There's, like I said, there are 61 different locations. So I'm just going to go through here. This is another piece that's at Stoneleaf. Now, Stoneleaf is actually, the woman who started it is, her name is Toomer, I believe. And she actually is the one who organized this, upstate art program. They did this last year and the year before, I believe, but this is the largest one they've done so far. And this is another piece at Stone Leaf. So this installation is up now. Okay, and this is kind of the information on Stone Leaf. Helen Toomer is the lady's name who actually organized this thing. Okay, and now we're going to move on to another exhibition at Bard College. That is on right now. With Pleasure, Pattern and Decoration in American Art. This was an art movement that took place from the early 70s into the 80s. It's still actually going on. There are still plenty of people that are involved using this approach, but it was again a reaction to kind of abstract expressionism and minimalist art. So both of those were very kind of exclusive, you know, not using figuration. These pieces are very much about using decoration and repeat pattern as a way of creating color and a work of art that had a certain different kind of energy. And this is a view inside the exhibition. This exhibition started out in Los Angeles at the Museum of Modern Art, Museum of Contemporary Art out there. And it's basically a very beautiful, big, luscious exhibition. You can go to it while this weekend is taking place, but also it is ongoing, so it will be there for a good long time. On the left is Faith Ringgold'S piece. I actually did a talk on her earlier, and this is a really lovely piece that's in this show. And Miriam Shapiro is one of the people who really used this technique to great advantage. Basically, it's using the notion of quilting and repeat pattern. That's something that's in the minimalist language, but using these really fanciful, wonderful colors and patterns to you know, basically, it's very lively work. It's really beautiful stuff, great color. Again, the notion of the crazy quilt and bringing this up and taking it and putting it in the gallery. So it's a use of what was viewed as a craft. You know, the craft of quilting was something which was kind of a step down from high art, and this is taking that technique and those means to create what was considered to be high art that got into the museums and into the galleries. And again, this is not just in the 80s. You see this piece was from 2020. And Al Loving and several other artists use this kind of quilt-like technique to create these pieces. And it's, okay. And there's another show on. There's a set of 6 of these large-scale Rauschenberg screen prints that are on at Vassar, at the museum at Vassar. There's also an exhibition that's surrounding it of other artists, pop artists who were working in this vein at that time. So it's worth a stop at Vassar in Poughkeepsie. So basically, the run up to Hudson from us is approximately an hour and a half, an hour and 45 minutes to get up there. Many of these exhibitions are within a 15 or 20-minute drive from Olana. When you go up to Hudson, basically, if you go down into the town of Hudson, which is not directly next to Olana, you got to drive it's about a 5-minute drive, 10-minute drive into Hudson. There's a bunch of antiquers there. There are 2 or 3 really fabulous galleries, and well worth stopping into town to see those. There are galleries over in Catterskill also, which is where the Thomas Cole estate is. So they're all, well within reach. Okay, and I have a couple of pieces here. Nature and the American Vision is from the New York Historical Society. And Olana Historic Site, the virtual tour, is the one I was talking about. You'll get an even better look at the interior of Olana from doing that tour than you will by going inside it, because it's so dark in there that you can barely see a lot of the stuff. Okay, so the other piece of the picture is I have up there the website upstateartweekend.org, but if you plug in Upstate Art Weekend into Google, you're going to get there. And basically, you can download and look at one of those maps. It shows you all the sites and all the places that are involved, so you can actually click on those participants and go to their sites and see what's there, so you can choose where you want to go and what you want to see, which I recommend highly, because maybe 30 of these locations are, fairly big venues. Others are a little dubious. Some are not art sites at all, but motels in the area. So I scratch my head at that, but there's a lot of information there and a lot available. Cross-pollination is going to be on for quite a while. So if you don't get to Olana and the Cole thing over that weekend, you can line up an appointment and go there. I believe it's on through October, but I'm not 100% certain. Hold on a second. This exhibition was put together with Crystal Bridges, the Walton Museum, down in Bentonville, Arkansas. So this show is going to be on through October 31st. And it has been at the Cummer Museum in Jacksonville, Florida, and Ringgold'S House Museum of American Art in North Carolina. Then it's come here to Thomas Cole in Olana. and then it's going to Crystal Bridges. So, are there any questions?
No, Larry, there are no questions.
No questions.
I loved it. I mean, I'm not, but the luminescent or the luminous
Luminist.
movement, never
yes.
heard of it.
Yeah.
And those paintings were exquisite.
They are. They are.
They were exquisite.
Well,
the birds alone.
Take a look at Kinson too. His work is fabulous. The coastal paintings, his use of color, his use of paint. You got to see him. There was actually a wonderful retrospective of his work in the 80s at the Metropolitan Museum, and they have at least 18 of his paintings in their permanent collection.
Do you know how big the birds, those you said?
They're very small. They're very small. They're about 16 by 12 inches or so. They're tiny. Wait a minute, I can tell you exactly because I've got the catalog right here.
Oh.
And they are 12 by 10 inches. Excuse me. They're even smaller than I thought they were.
Yeah, that's small.
They're tiny, and they're hummingbirds. So
it was gorgeous. So somebody did ask, how did Cole get the Brazilian birds to paint? How did
it wasn't Cole. That was Heed.
Okay,
so actually he I believe it was something terrible like taxidermy. Getting them to sit still.
They go very fast, those little birds, right?
Yes.
Right. And there was another one I loved by Yamaguchi.
Yeah. That's in
with
that
the bronze
yes.
gold leaf. Oh God,
Yes.
those some of those paintings. I'm not a big fan of Hudson River, just so you all know.
Yeah.
But they were interesting for sure.
Yeah.
And that's part of history.
Yes.
But some of those more contemporary, I thought were just magnificent. Thank you.
Okay.
Well, does anyone have any more questions or anything like that before we sign off? Larry, I'll call you right after this.
Okay. The next visit is going to be the second week in September. What is that? The 10th? I believe it's.
It sounds
10th.
right.
Hold on. Yeah, it's the 10th. And we're going to do the Hammond Museum. Okay. Basically, that's fairly local, and I may cover a couple of other things when we do that. But and then later in the month, we're gonna do Sophie. Well, you know what? I'm not going to say it right now. I got to research it a little bit more.
Okay, we'll let you go. We'll let you go. It was great.
All right.
A lot of thank yous already, Larry, and thank you so much. And just to everybody, have a safe weekend. And I hope to see you on the 10th. And don't forget to go to our website, which is chappaqua.library.org, to see all the programs that we have at the library. Thank you all for coming. Oh, so somebody just said, since you won't be able to see everything in the area on the 27th to 9th, where would you go? What were your preferential spaces?
Okay, I showed you my preferences right now. This group of things that I showed, I think are things that would be fun to see and doable. But I also, like I said, I recommend really highly that you go to their website and click through the locations, because you'll be able to see a lot of different things and make a decision for yourselves. Okay, that's fair enough. So something to do, I would advise going Saturday, not Sunday. Sunday, there's supposed to be a storm. So thank you all for coming.